Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. This is a show where I take a look at every classic Doctor Who story, plus a bunch of Big Finish audio dramas, 7 days a week, one episode a day. And today, on the 15th of September 2018, we are starting the penultimate Season 13 story of Tom Baker's second season with the brain of Morbius. And we're, of course, starting with Part 1, and the first thing I have to say, Christopher Barry's direction immediately oozes with atmosphere. We open up on a planet. There's lightning. It's dark. We see a mutant from the mutants essentially get his head chopped off. It's not at all creepy or terrifying. And by that I mean this is really well done. Let me be honest. Like this story, just this first episode in general, is really well done. Perhaps a little esoteric and a little odd in places, just for what it does, but it does some amazing stuff. We build quite a lot of atmosphere just with the way things start. We have, we have a sense of fear that everything is, of what's going on. We have, it's a barren landscape. We get a lot of Time Lord mythology in this episode, oddly enough. For the first real time, we get just this mystery of we're on this planet called Karn, and basically there's this sisterhood here who thinks the Time Lords are coming to steal their elixir of life. Yeah, so we have an immortal race of women just living on this planet, and it's very creepy. It's a really interesting, one of those interesting sort of premises where it's like, oh, we have this could be where we're going, and I think, the story does it really well. You get the sense that everything is creepy. You have, this Dr. Solon, who is famous for head transplants, and well, it's basically they do it's Doctor Who does Frankenstein. Let's be honest. The big reveal at the end is there's this creature, this headless creature moving around. He has a bunch of head sculptures which are creepy. The Sisterhood of Karn seem to have these powers that are just sort of, I guess you could call them superhuman powers. They're not. They're not your standard powers. They're like, oh, they blow. They were able to get wind to blow through in freak storms. There are a bunch of crashed ships, and they transport they transport the Doctor to basically they transport the Doctor to their lair by the end of the episode. But basically, the Doctor and Sarah Jane arrive on the planet because the Time Lords basically made the TARDIS go off course. It's, this is like, no, you have to be here. You're going to do our dirty work for us again because, that's what you do. You're the Doctor. You can do our dirty work for us. You are, that's your job now. That's basically your function, which is interesting because the Doctor is, right, like Tom Baker plays the Doctor, this is the character who doesn't like doing the Time Lord's dirty work. Like, he really, really hates it. Like, there's this amazing bit just at the beginning where the Doctor is, the Doctor has just this, he's angry and he sulks, and it's hilarious. He's sulking, and Sarah Jane's trying to cheer him up, and she's, just trying to explore the planet. Elizabeth Sladen gives an amazing performance here. She also gets to have a point, like, she gets herself into the into the story. Like, she talks, like, they joke. They also quite realize that Kondo, the servant of Solon, who is this mute, he's kind of the Igor from the classic Frankenstein film. Again, they're doing more Frankenstein the film, not Frankenstein the book, at least in this first part. And he's kind of overdone a little. There are points where I think this is written by Terrence Dicks and Robert Holmes under the pseudonym Robin Bland, mainly Robert Holmes. I think one issue that I have is that Solon's evilness, they kind of do, they overdo a little bit. Philip Maddock plays him amazingly. Like, he's a really creepy villain, but it's a little bit overdone. And the first episode seems a little too long for my liking. It feels like it's like, hey, we were doing, um, we were doing this story, so it's like, hey, we're, we've got the, to finish it like this, and I don't think I necessarily like that. It doesn't quite work out for the best. Like um, it makes it obvious. It makes it obvious that he's trying to kill the doctor when he tells Solon, "Oh no, let the wine breathe." It's a very awkward scene. But other than that, he's a really creepy villain. Like, the Doctor and Sarah Jane, they have this joke of like the Doctor's like, well, like his lovely head, which is Solon tells the Doctor, which is just side note. That's a creepy thing to say to someone. Like, oh, you've got a very good head. Um, I would get serial. That's just serial killer vibes, like right there. Like, oh, you like my head? Yeah, it's not for sale. You can't have it. Um, but then Doctor's like, oh, well, I quite like this one. I used to have an old gray model that people liked. Sarah Jane's like, oh, I certainly did. It's things like that, um, and that really make the episode work. As it's dripping with atmosphere. We have the start, we have the plot going, even if it hasn't completely kicked in yet. It's going overall. So I'm going to give The Brain of Morbius Part 1 a 9 out of 10. Alright, it is the 16th of September 2018, and I just finished watching Part 2 of The Brain of Morbius. And Part 2 of The Brain of Morbius, oddly enough, improves quite a lot on a couple of flaws that I had with Part 1. Mainly the fact that, well, we actually get some information about the Sisterhood and Solon's plans, and quite a bit of background on who Morbius was. He was sort of a Time Lord despot who was sentenced to execution. Now, it's not quite sure if this is during the time of Rassilon or afterwards, but we can be sure that this was, a lot before the Doctor's time. He's a much older character than you'd think Morbius is. And the big cliffhanger is that Morbius' brain has survived, and because we hear Solon talking to just this voice, and, well, you kind of have the obvious that it's going to be Morbius because the title is The Brain of Morbius. But oddly enough, I'm not going to fault either Dix or Holmes for writing it like that, because, honestly, the atmosphere makes up for it. Like, you were kind of I don't think the big cliffhanger isn't that the brain survives, it's that the brain survives and it's in a jar and it's talking. This isn't like some Frankenstein we're trying to resurrect just a dead corpse. No, the consciousness is still there, which is honestly very, very creepy. Like, my God, having someone's consciousness in a jar, in a brain in a jar, is just it's a terrifying state of being. That final shot is just it sticks with you in this second episode. Like, you wouldn't expect it. But also we get a decent amount of information with the Sisterhood of Karn, mainly the fact of how psychopathic they are, and I mean this literally. They are psychopaths. They have captured the Doctor, which saved him from Solon, who was going to cut off his head. Still intends to cut off his head. That's where we're going to get to Solon in a bit, because Solon has some amazing stuff this episode. But as things go on, you get this fear that, well, the Sisterhood is convinced the Doctor was sent by the Time Lords, and the Doctor knows he was sent by the Time Lords. He doesn't know for what, but they're convinced they want to steal the elixir of life. Now, the idea is that, of course, they're an immortal race of sisters, but their elixir seems to be running out, and the Doctor even comments on this, basically saying, no, it shouldn't run out. It's, from the center of the planet. That's how it's created, just by the planet existing. It shouldn't be gone for millions of years yet. Like, it should still be, totally and completely fine. Like, you aren't in the a point where you don't need the elixir. Like it's, and you know what, as an audience member, you help, you believe him, you believe the doctor because he's on your side, but the sisters don't, so they decide, well, you won't confess to being here by the Time Lords for whatever reason, so we're just gonna sacrifice you and burn you alive, which is hilarious and terrifying at the same time. Like, seriously, it's one of those things where you have the story basically work on the logic of, because because the doctor is evil, we put him in peril, and they have flames ready. Solon even bursts in, basically being like, "Oh wait, I don't, you know, I don't want him to die." So he starts to beg for his head to be left alive. And if I'm gonna be brutally honest, he grovels. It's good. Philip Matic gives an amazing performance just in general. Like, he also plays the role of Solon just as this creepy guy who's, going to grasp any chance he can take to steal the doctor's head. Like, seriously, it's a weird episode overall, and I love it for it. It is some amazing stuff. It's creepy, enough that you ask yourself, is this really where everything's going to go? And yeah, you think that they're going to chop off the doctor's head, and and it's of course amazing that Sarah Jane saves them, but she gets blinded, and there's a flash of light from the sisters wanting to try to keep their sacrifice, well, able to be sacrificed, and she's blinded. And Elizabeth Sladen in this episode, and, well, let's be honest, in the next couple of episodes, this is probably one of her best Doctor Who performances overall. Just as the blind Sarah, she really communicates that, no, she is terrified right now. Like, this is her at her lowest. She can't see. She thinks, because I can't see, I'm not going to be able to survive. Like, oh, maybe I can sell flowers. She even sort of jokes with herself just so she can try to, make it through, and basically get the whole idea of, the idea that, this is that, I'm going to get through this. And it's very powerful stuff. Like, Liz Sladen does an amazing job at it. And then it also brings out something amazing in Tom Baker, as Solon tells him, well, she might be blind forever, because the only thing that might help her is the elixir of life. So the doctor has to go back to the sisters to try to get it. And Solon has a plan. I'm pretty sure he's just lying through his teeth, which, he's the villain. He's a really good villain. But he's lying through his teeth, and the doctor just goes along with it, which, makes sense because he's the doctor. But yeah, it's an amazing just sort of episode overall. Like, he sends Kondo, who is still his servant, who's also gets to rebel and shows that he's a bit more intelligent than he lets on. But yeah, it's just, that's really where the episode ends. Then we get to the cliffhanger with Sarah Jane discovering the brain, though she doesn't see it because she's blind. So yeah, overall, I'm going to give The Brain of Morbius Part 2 a 10 out of 10, because it's just an amazing episode. Alright, it is the 17th of September, 2018, and I just finished watching Part 3 of The Brain of Morbius, and the gothic atmosphere continues as Philip Maddox, Professor Solon, goes further down the rabbit hole into insanity in this one. Obviously, the cliffhanger was really well done. And you have Morbius. You have confirmation that Morbius is, in fact, the Time Lord. And we don't quite get confirmation of it, but it's implied quite heavily, if I can add, that the Doctor's involvement in proceedings here are quite simply because of are because of Morbius and not for the elixir of life. The Time Lords apparently, we actually find out some interesting things, is that the Time Lords only use the elixir of life to help regenerate in difficult regenerations, unlike the sisters who use it just to prolong their lives, which I think is an interesting concept and an interesting contrast between the two societies. Here we have a sort of a very patriarchal society, as we will see a couple stories down the line with in the Deadly Assassin with the Time Lords. All the times we've seen currently have been men um, that try to use it sparingly, but are almost also too pompous to ask for help, sort of helping build up that they're not exactly good people because they're very, very pompous. Whereas the matriarchal sisterhood is much more, we are immortal. There's also some interesting musings on the idea of immortality, because the idea is that Time Lords regenerate, but Time Lords eventually die as a result of things. They are, they're the ones that, they have a limit on how long they can live. And, it's an interesting concept. And what's interesting is that the Doctor almost calls out the Sisterhood for living so long, is that because of immortality, they can't have innovation. Oddly enough, I picked up on this partially. It's something that Doctor Who will eventually tackle, and I'm actually going to cover in this when we take a pause from the marathon after season 14, which I had mentioned before. But because the Doctor realizes, oh, the problem with the elixir, it's because you've had soot build up after millennia. Basically, you've built up enough gas that and soot from the gas that the sisters, well, they can't survive with it. They are out. They can't, it stuffs the flames. And of course, the sisters are ready to chop the Doctor's head off. And they almost have to admit that both sides have been fools in this argument. That, of course, the Time Lords are idiots because they're Time Lords. But the sisters have to admit that, we were in fact wrong. We had, we probably, you weren't here to steal stuff. Also, Marin having to realize that, oh shit, Morbius might still be alive, is a big plot point. Like, really? Like, she doesn't realize that he could have survived, that someone could have tried to rescue his brain somehow, though I'm not entirely sure how that's explained, but you know what? It doesn't matter, because the mystery is enough behind it. Like, you get the idea that, oh, his brain was saved, it's fine. But we also get some interesting stuff for the rest of this episode itself, with Solon. Of course, he's descending into madness because Morbius wants to be survived as, Morbius is annoyed because even a sponge, he gives this line that even a sponge has more life than I, that because he's a brain in a jar, he can't do anything, he just wants to be out of this horrendous body quick. He wants it ASAP. And even though the Doctor cannot save, they don't have the Doctor's head to transfer it, he basically is like, just give me the body that you were building, that's interesting, like, that he's that obsessed that it's like, no, I need to live, let me live, in this makeshift thing that, it doesn't really, it doesn't allow him mobility, it doesn't allow him essentially to be who he was before. It's just sort of there. It's something so he can live, and he doesn't have to die. And that's what they do. And then you have this big drama with Kondo who gets shot, and you see the blood, like, it's very graphic, and I love it. It takes the matter seriously, because Kondo figures out that on this makeshift body, that's where his arm went, which I find hilarious, and Sullivan doesn't even question it, because Sullivan was never intending to give Kondo his arm back. He didn't care about the gentle giant, as he could be called. He makes the blind Sarah Jane, who the blindness is going to wear off eventually, which is good, because I don't know, because it sort of shows that, hey, she wasn't in any real danger, but and that also sort of allows the doctor to tell the other sisters to understand, like, why he went. She has to help, and it's creepy because she has to help Pump. And by the end of it, the story, the big cliffhanger is the Morbius brain is alive. So, that being said, Brain of Morbius Part 3 is great. I'm going to give it a 10 out of 10. Alright, it is the 18th of September 2018, and I just finished watching Part 4 of The Brain of Morbius. And Part 4 of The Brain of Morbius is an episode where, well, I'd have to say that we conclude the story very, very well. What's interesting is that we kind of cut Solon out of the story, in the last moments, oddly enough, because, well, the doctor kills him. The doctor's a stone-cold murderer in this one. And I think that's actually really well done. Because, let's be honest, if we're in his shoes, it's not like he's committing genocide. But, in his shoes, wouldn't you do the same thing? You're trying to stop a war criminal from coming back to life. Someone who should be dead, by all accounts. That you really, you don't want to see them alive again. It's things like this, it's a really interesting sort of dilemma. You have the fact that the doctor, has to be the one, ends up being the one to kill Solon with hydrogen cyanide gas. And it's creepy. But that's not the only part about the story we've got. We've also got the stuff with the Sisterhood of Karn, mainly being on the doctor's side. They end up, helping him because they even more because they realize, hey, he's not evil. What's kind of sad is, well, his plan doesn't actually work because Morbius is still alive at the end of it. Like, this is really, we're building up to this big mind-bending competition, where they pit their minds against each other. We get this hint that there may be other incarnations of the Doctor before the first Doctor, something that will eventually be paid off, sort of, in some books, and some audios later down the road, or maybe not, depending on what your canon is, which I will not necessarily get into that, because I personally like the idea that they are the other's faces. I hate the whole Titan Comics idea that the other is just 11, like, because the other in all of his appearances outside of Titan Comics doesn't act like the 11th Doctor. Like, really, that doesn't quite work, because the other's not 11. They're two very, very different characters. But I'm not going to get into that now. I'm not even going to cover the 11th Doctor in this series, as far as I know. But, it's an amazingly well put together episode. Everything sort of just falls into place very, very nicely. Everything from, you have the mind meld, just the design of the Morbius creature with the fishbowl. It's got that Forbidden Planet sort of look, but also it looks like a Frankenstein monster, and it looks intimidating because it's so big. Like, really, it's the size helps really make the creature look like it's this big evil thing coming lumbering towards you, coming to attack. You also have just some really good Tom Baker lines. Like, he is really a lot of fun. Even though he's very, very serious, like, hey, this is a very, very, very troubling situation, because we have a Time Lord dictator who may be coming back to life, which, that's genuinely a scary situation for anyone. Like, this is this isn't your average Doctor Who episode where it's like, yeah, we have a villain, but it's not really, there's no real danger. It's dark. And Terrence Dix and Robert Holmes do a great job of writing. I know. And yes, I know Dix didn't really write it, but a lot of the ideas are still his. And he still deserves credit because there are definitely points that feel like a Terrence Dix script. And oddly enough, Dix and Holmes have this really complementary style of writing that it works well together. Like, I know Dix probably wouldn't have gone as dark as this one does. That's more on Holmes. But it's still, just an amazing sort of episode that it does its job. It makes you feel for the Morbius creature. And the Morbius creature eventually does get defeated and killed. And the Doctor actually saves the day, and he even leaves some blue touch paper to help with the elixir of life problem. Also, you have, I think the character of Marin's death in this episode is also very touching, because she's really sort of had to learn from her ways that, she hasn't had, the best of lives, but she's had to, save everything. And it's one of those things where stuff, stuff had stuff gone differently, things, might be different. But it's still really, really good. So overall, I'm going to give The Brain of Morbius Part 4 another 10 out of 10. And we add up the scores to give The Brain of Morbius as a story a total score of 9.75 out of 10. Thank everybody for watching this installment of the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. And, as always, join me next time when we take a look at the Season 13 finale of Doctor Who, to the end of Don Baker's second season, and a story where we have another story that rips off another classic horror movie with the Seeds of Doom.